Dr. Jazz.
I've done this talk now with so many guys that you've played with, so it's like I'm connecting the dots, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think my brother was maybe one of the early ones. Yeah.
Yeah. We played together like the first time in 2006, I think, or 5 already. Then when I started doing this, I was like, yeah, well, come on, let's first talk to the people I know. I mean, personally, and that's better. So, but I'll just jump in and ask you, like, I listened to the last album you did with Omar Sosa.
Okay.
And
which one is that one? Which one is that? East African Journey?
Yeah. Unless you've done another one in between.
Well, there are other ones where I've done production work mostly. So I play a little bit on there, little bits overdubs and stuff, but not much. I'm just doing the production mixing.
Because you're really incredibly busy with him. I mean, and you have a nice connection going on. I wanted to ask you, when did this start, actually?
This started, it's got to be nearly 20 years, I think.
Wow. Okay.
And the first record we did was Mulattos.
Oh yeah. Okay, I have that one. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so that was the first one we did. So before that, I produced a record for Dhafer Youssef, which was called Electric Sufi.
Really? You produced that one? I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he loved that record. So he was doing a gig with Dhafer in Paris, and that's how I met up with him. And I think he'd already done quite a lot of records on his own. You know, I mean, he can do that, you know, easily himself. But I think he wanted to have a kind of a helping hand, just and see how that could push him to go a little further. So that's how we started out with Mulattos. And then, you know, when he has big projects, doesn't always work for smaller projects, but when he had the bigger, more ambitious projects, he called me, so I helped him out with those.
How did you start getting involved being a producer?
I guess that started in the UK 1990, I think. I'd already done a couple of records with Django Bates, which we produced ourselves, and then I did also a solo quintet record with my brother. And you know, I've always enjoyed the recording process, the creative, you know, constructing a recording and everything. And but those projects were relatively costly. You know, we paid for it out of our own pocket. So 1990, that's kind of when the DAT machines arrived, and they were relatively affordable. And so I bought a nice DAT machine and a microphone, and I think I wanted to test the microphone and the machine, and that test became a record, which was with Billy Jenkins. Oh, yeah. Do you know Billy Jenkins, the guitar player?
Yeah. You did like 3 albums, right, with him?
And Stuart Hall was the other guitar player, so there were 2 guitar players, and Steve Watts on double bass. And so, you know, once you start getting material, then you get more mics, preamps, blah, 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 multi-track recorders, and, you know, it started from there. You know, and so that meant that I was at my own pace for doing recordings. I wasn't reliant on either, you know, money so much, and also the time frame of record labels and stuff like that. So, you know, as I had that equipment, and I started to get a little bit into electronic music, so that made me think about starting my own record label, which is what I did as well. So, which is called Plush.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, like when did you start the record label? I mean, I wanted to ask you.
That was in 2000. So I guess, you know, I had a kind of 10 years of experience of doing my recordings. At first, I was doing the recording, and I had somebody else mix, and then I started mixing myself. And in 2000, I was getting interested in electronic music and mixing that with improvised music. And so that was difficult to put that kind of music out on the jazz labels that I was linked to. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to start my own record label. So that's how that came about, with the idea of mixing improvised music or jazz and electronics, you know.
Do you find it, if you compare, like, you know, some guys like, I don't know, Jerry Hemingway or Tim Byrne or all those guys that did it like in 1977 already, which was, I guess, quite hard to do. But like, if you compare now the situation to 20 years ago when you started having an independent label or your own label, how would you describe the situation or the development?
Well, it's always a little difficult, you know. It's really dependent on promotion and live gigs. So if you're not doing a lot of live gigs, that's difficult to sell your label. And if you don't have a good promotion for your label too, you know, media presence and blah blah blah. So it's not impossible, but it's a little bit difficult. So, you know, that's why I suppose we remain independent records, because we don't have access to the big machine, you know, the big dogs. So
yeah, you would have to invest so much money, man, into promo, like.
Yeah, I mean, unless of course the music is just so startling that everybody comes to you, you know, that can happen too. But you know, but that's why we're independent record labels, because we're independent and we do our own thing, you know. So
yeah, definitely. But you're always a producer when you produce, like, I don't know, Dhafer's record or Omar Sosa. How does that go, and how did you dive into that?
Well, in those cases, you know, it depends project to project. So it can be like when we did Mulattos with Omar, it was trying to find a concept for the album. You know, he wanted to do kind of Cuban music, but not Cuban music. He wanted to sort of, you know, have a sideways look at that, and I played on it too, so which is not always easy to produce and play at the same time. But anyway, we did that, and there was some complications, some hurdles, which actually then became advantageous. So each project has its own particularities. With Dhafer, he'd done his sessions already in New York for Electric Sufi, so he did the sessions, and you know, it was a kind of like put together session. So the tracks were a little bit kind of jam session like. So he'd already done the recordings, and then you know, I did the editing and kind of, you know, really kind of knocked it into some kind of shape, you know, from our discussions. And then he would redo quite a lot of oud parts or vocal parts, so that we really kind of fine-tuned the thing. So he had the concept already, and then I just added my thing into that. And basically, you know, I'm interested in, you know, making him sound as good as possible, and you know, in line with the concept of where he wants to go, you know. So that's those are two configurations. One is, you know, I have the material, and then I sculpt it a little bit, you know, more or less depending on the project. And or in other cases it's like from the get-go, so you're involved in the conception of the whole thing, you know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's like, it's, I guess, for an artist it's nice to have someone from the outer view to guide you.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages maybe is that we're kind of equal on a musical plane, you know. I mean, I understand, for instance, with Omar, I understand all the references that he has for music. I mean, we're almost the same age, and we have, you know, the music I followed when I was a kid is the same as he followed. So of course, you know, I'm not so hip to all of the Cuban rhythms and stuff, so I learn a lot about that from Omar. But the editing, as it's very rhythmic, is complex, and I think being a drummer makes you know, gives me an advantage in the editing. I can go pretty quickly, and he doesn't have to explain stuff to me. So that's the thing about, you know, obviously I'm not going to have this, you know, I'm a drummer, so I don't have maybe the same harmonic knowledge as lots of piano players, for instance, that I've worked with. But in terms of editing, often it comes down to timing and stuff. So that's where I'm pretty strong.
What did you listen to as a kid, by the way? You asked.
I guess one of the first jazz records that really had an influence on me was an album by Milt Jackson called Goodbye, and it had a curious sort of rhythm section because there was Steve Gadd on there.
Really?
With Milt Jackson and Cedar Walton. Imagine Steve Gadd and Cedar Walton. And I loved that record, and I was a big fan of Steve Gadd's playing. And there was a couple of tracks on there. Billy Cobham was playing drums, and Herbie Hancock. It's a great record.
Really, I don't know it. Well, okay.
And it was a CTI album, so the CTI sound, Creed Taylor. So that's a particular sort of seductive produced sound. So I loved that album, and then I was into a lot into sort of Earth, Wind and Fire and the Johnson Brothers kind of funk stuff. I was big into that, and Players Association. That was a sort of a session, sort of a New York session band, and people like Bob Berg were in that. So from Bob Berg you skip over to Cedar Walton Trio, and you make all these different references. Of course, massively into Herbie Hancock. Sunlight was that. Wow, I remember as a kid I bought that in the it's like the paper shop. You would sell records, and I bought Sunlight in there as a vinyl. It's cool. And otherwise, then the jazz records that came later, but all the ECM records, of course, like loads of people, and so early days I was really into the CTI productions, so I latched onto the sound of that, and then so I would just buy the CTI albums, like I would later do then with ECM records. You get into a certain sound, a certain concept, and you just follow the editorial line, so
amazing. What about your playing? I mean, like, I know in the 80s you started doing the loose tubes thing, and there was like a huge revival in a sense. I mean, when I speak to British musicians in the 80s, also due to loose tubes, but prior to that, like, what was your beginnings to the London or UK jazz scene? How did that happen? I mean,
well, in British schools we had this kind of advantage where you could have music lessons at school. Or most schools have general music lessons to initiation in music. It's in a broad sense. But the advantage of some of the British schools, you could have like one-on-one music lessons. And at the school when I started, it must have been, it was 8 or 9 years of age or something. So you could have there was a list sent round, and you could choose the instrument you want. So I just picked drums for some reason, and so I had drum lessons at school. And there was also a kind of a school orchestra at the school, so I played in the school orchestra too. And then my brother, who's as saxophone player, he then did the same thing as me like 2 years later, and he had, I guess it would be clarinet that he started on in school, and my sister too had flute lessons at school, and that's how it works. So there's a kind of a school orchestral. It's mostly orchestral, there's like not rock bands or jazz groups or anything. So it's mostly classical music, and I think that one of the directors at this is primary school, so at the age of 9 or 10. The guy there, he would do arrangements for the orchestra, which is pretty cool, and he would obviously arrange, related to the abilities of the students. So that was really, really good. And then so you're into a kind of I was then in a local school's classical orchestra, playing timpani and stuff like that, which was pretty boring because there's not much to do on the timpani. So in the orchestra I used to improvise a little bit, and the conductor never noticed, or he never said anything. So that's where the improvising starts, because there's nothing to do otherwise. And And then at some point, I guess, you know, you have to play with other people, especially being a drummer, you know. So there was another kind of a youth jazz orchestra that existed. So I joined that, and that was my way into jazz and playing a drum kit, you know. And so that was fairly productive, you know, at a young age. So, you know, at 12 or 13, I was doing gigs already, you know, so that was pretty good. And then my brother followed me in the same kind of system, you know.
Yeah. Did you and your brother then like explore the music also together a lot? I mean,
not really, because
at home or play or
no, not really, because you know, when we, you know, 2 years is kind of a big difference in abilities at that age. So you could say that I was like way ahead of him. So you know, we didn't necessarily play too much together, but you know, of course, then he catches up. And then so you know, later then, you know, from about 17 onwards, we played a lot together, and it was always very natural, because in a way, you know, I could you know, listen to him practicing, so I knew his first licks, you know, and so, you know, I know all that stuff, where it's coming from, you know. So it's kind of makes some stuff very easy, you know. It's very fluid, so it's good.
Yeah,
you know, we fight a little bit, but that's kind of brother stuff.
Sure. But what about entering the London jazz scene? How did that happen then? I mean,
well, you know, I was in one of these
youth connection.
Yeah, I was in this youth orchestra, jazz orchestra, and which was a regional thing. You know, we're from Birmingham, in the centre of the UK, and then there was also a national orchestra. So I started playing in this the National Youth Jazz Orchestra, which was based in London. So, you know, our parents were incredibly supportive of us doing music, and would take us to rehearsals and stuff. So I would go down pretty much every week to London, which was like a, you know, 2.5 hour drive to do these rehearsals. And that's how I got into kind of London scene. And then as soon as I could get my driver's license, I would go on my own, and I'd be doing rehearsals and then some pickup gigs at the same time with different people, you know, people that were kind of centered around that orchestra. Most of the people were a little older than me, and they'd say, oh, if you're not doing anything Saturday night, do a gig, blah, blah, blah. And so it would work like that. So I'd end up doing a kind of a full weekend of gigs and rehearsals, and then drive back home to go to school on Monday. And so when I left school, I was already working quite a lot in London already. And it wasn't immediately that I met Django Bates and Ian Bellamy, who, you know, my contemporaries, you could say, because I was playing with people mostly older than me. I played a lot also at that time with John Taylor.
Really?
Yeah.
How did that happen? I love John, man.
Yeah, that came about through, I used to play a lot at this club called the 606 Club, which is a kind of an after hours jazz club in London. Started around midnight, and people would come and sit in, and, you know, it was a late night hang, so you meet loads of people there. And there was a bass player, Ron Mathewson. And, you know, there's always the drum and bass link up. And so I think we enjoyed playing together in those jam sessions. And he said, well, you should, I talked about you to John Taylor, to Stan Saltzman, saxophone player, and maybe you can do some gigs. So I was doing this gig with Ron on bass, Stan Saltzman on saxophone, and John Taylor on piano. I didn't know what the hell. I didn't know what the hell was going on, you know, but I was kind of just following everything. So I guess I was about 17 when that happened. So then that, you know, that created that sort of relationship. And Ron Mathewson also played a lot with Gordon Beck. I don't know if you remember Gordon Beck. Oh,
sure, man. Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so I was playing with Gordon as well. And then Ron, again, he hooked me up to Ronnie Scott's band. So when the drummer there, Martin Drew, couldn't do the gigs because he was touring with Oscar Peterson, then I was playing with Ronnie Scott. So that opened another doorway to meeting loads of people, and I played at Ronnie Scott's club a lot. So I was playing with mostly these a generation older than me. And so it took a while before I hooked up with Django Bates and Ian Bellamy, and then that that was cool. We were kind of playing our own music instead of you know, standards, or you know, Kenny Wheeler's music, John Taylor's music, and Gordon Beck.
How was the atmosphere like in I don't know, mid 80s, I guess, when you started Loose Tubes? I mean, how did that happen actually, this whole project or band, let's say?
Well, there's the Loose Tubes thing. Well, I wasn't in there at the beginning.
Yeah.
So there was already this rehearsal band with young players, which I'd heard about. And I can't remember why or how. And they said, well, why don't you come along? And I wasn't playing drums, I was playing percussion then. I was playing congas and percussion in my way of doing stuff. And so yeah, in the band it was pretty exciting because there was like a young energy. There's some very funny people in there. Was Ashley Slater, who was very amusing. And there was, you know, a lot of really good players, and so it was definitely a good vibe. And I think because there was this vibe in the band, and then the audience kind of responded to that, there was a really good energy. And then, you know, people like John Taylor and Kenny Wheeler, they kind of liked the band as well. So, you know, obviously resonated with lots of people, and the press, you know, they latched onto that thing as well. They're like the new British jazz, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So, you know, so, you know, how was it at that particular time? Well, we were young, and it was all happening. So it was interesting, you know. Like I guess it is for, you know, many young people. If you get involved in something, you know, and it gets creative, it's exciting, you know.
Yeah. No, I'm saying because it seems like almost like a platform for many players, you know, who were in that group, became amazing band leaders, all of you, you know, and made your own music then, and like it was like,
yeah, I mean, it was like I say, it was just a collection of really good players,
musicians, yeah,
and not everybody was composing, but you know, a large number were composing music and had their own projects, parallel projects and stuff. So it was an exciting time. I mean, the youth orchestra that I was playing in, it was kind of a different scene, but loads of those players are still around, and you know, a lot of those players are heavily involved in doing music sessions, film music and stuff. So, you know, it was like a parallel universe. But you know, once you're around talented people, those talented people just stick around and they branch out. So that's just a normal phenomena, you know.
Yeah. Like you mentioned Kenny Wheeler. You also played with Kenny, right?
Yeah, I because I was playing quite a lot with John Taylor.
Yeah.
And then you know, they had that marvelous group with Norma Azimuth, which I love that band. And then they would do some gigs, and they asked me to play with them, and there was Chris Lawrence on bass. So it was kind of an extended Azimuth band.
Whoa.
So it was like a 5-piece band, you know, the same music. And so I played quite a lot with
basically like small group. That's beautiful that you got to experience that with him.
Yeah, and then also John, sometimes we did tours with we do stuff at Ronnie Scott's club, so we'd be playing with George Coleman as a pickup rhythm section, and then I tour with Lee Konitz, with John Taylor and stuff like that, you know. So I was doing John's music, and then when he was booked for as a sideman for other things, he'd bring me into that too sometimes, you know. So that was cool.
How are these guys? I mean, I love these guys, you know. These are some of my favorite composers and players. And how are they as band leaders? I don't know, Kenny, you know, I mean,
well, Julian played more often with Kenny because he was in his big band. You know, the gigs I did with Kenny, some were under his name, but mostly he was just involved in the projects that we were in together. You know, but you know, Kenny was just beautiful. I mean, he was always very easygoing, you know. With John's music, which in a certain sense rhythmically was maybe a little more complex,
tricky, yeah,
rhythmically, or more precision. You know, there was more elements you had to be precise about. So we would work more on the music than, you know. With Kenny, it was just always very cool and just very, very easygoing, you know. He wasn't asking me to do anything in particular. It was just, you know, do your thing, you know. So
yeah. I wanted to ask you, like, you know, you're explaining now you basically played with all these amazing UK musicians, so you're kind of already in the mid 80s or were really heavily involved in the scene. How come then you decided to move to France, actually, since you had like a thing going already in the UK?
Well, you know, those were the Margaret Thatcher years, so that was a thing, you know, and I didn't leave the UK because of her, but you know, I sensed that some stuff was starting to get a little bit difficult, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get out of here and have a little look around, see what's happening elsewhere, which is what I did in 1990. I started moving around because, yeah, like you say, I was traveling in Europe doing gigs, but I didn't really know the scene too well. So in 1990, and a couple of other things happened too. I played a lot with Dudu Pukwana. I don't know if you know Dudu Pukwana from Chris McGregor, the Blue Note
the
scene.
South African,
yeah, and both Dudu and Chris McGregor died in 1990. So, you know, that was kind of like an end of a kind of an era in a way. So I thought, okay, let's get out and have a look around. So I went to the, have you heard of this Banff School of...
everyone. I spoke the other day to Martin speak, and he said that you went together, right? Or something.
Yeah, right. So we went, you know, so in 1990, I decided to leave the UK. I went to Spain a little bit to check out the family and stuff, you know, spend some time with the family over there. And I wasn't doing too much. Martin said, oh, let's go to Canada. There's this thing, you know, over there. So Kenny was teaching there. So, you know, I already knew Kenny. So I didn't go there to have lessons from Kenny, but there was Steve Coleman was there. And I thought, okay, let's go. And there I met loads of interesting people again. You know, I'm always inspired by, you know, the meetings and the people that you meet. So there was my very close colleague, Benoit Delbecq. That's
that's how you guys hooked up. Okay.
That's how we met. And then there was Ethan Iverson there that year, and Seamus Blake was there, Ralph Alessi, Yorick Dextra, also that I worked a lot with. And so there was lots of interesting people. So, you know, I had a whole bunch of addresses. And so when I started traveling, I went to France and I met up with Benoit. I went to Holland, hung out with Jorrit, and we started playing together. And then I went to Cologne. And, you know, each different country or, you know, capital city had a sort of different musical identity, you know. I mean, I guess it's kind of almost like a stereotype thing, but each different country had its qualities. And, you know, so I would pick up on some of these things and kind of integrate them into my playing or steal the good bits, you know, from each different place. And, you know, through all of that, France seemed like a good place to settle, you know, so it was relatively close to London. So, you know, I settled in France, you know, and I've been here ever since.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It seems like, you know, especially Benoit, with Benoit, you have like a really strong connection. And
I mean, we've been playing music now for 30 years, you know, so that's a stretch, you know.
Was Recyclers the first band you did together? I mean, I love that group, by the way. How did that happen?
Well, you know, it was in France, and I was playing with Benoit. We did his first record, which is called Paintings. And you know, so I thought, I'm in France, you know, let me think about getting a group together. What kind of thing do I want to do? And so, you know, I obviously thought of Benoit. And I met Noël Acchoté. That was kind of through Marc Ducret. and I kind of liked what he was doing, and so I thought, okay, let's try a trio thing, which is quite rhythmic, sonic, a sonic thing. So I was writing the music for that, and so that's how that came about, and that's had a long, there's been some transformations with that band, but that's also had a long stretch. That's good too.
Did you play also with Ducré when you were in France sometimes?
Yeah. He had a band, quintet that he started, and he asked me to play in that. And I played a lot with Mark and Hans Ludemann in Germany. So yeah, I mean, Mark is an incredible musician, and there's a few real star players in France for me, and and Mark and Benoit are the two key figures for me, in French music. So
still so underrated, I think. When I do sometimes workshops, and then you talk to younger guitarists who study somewhere, and they're like, Marc Ducré, like, what? Are you kidding me? People, it's just like one of the most original voices on the instrument. Like,
it's difficult to explain all
the industry.
But it's undeniable, the voice that he's got. I really love that solo record he did for Winter and Winter, the acoustic guitar one. I love that.
Yeah, he's so good. But speaking with Benoit, I wanted to ask you about one project, particularly about Funhouse, that you did together. Those double.
The double
Jerry
trio.
Hemingway, Jean-Jacques Avenel and Mark Elias, like just the band there, Fred Hirsch. I mean, like how did that go? Like, how much did you guys talk or not? Because it sounds so organic, actually, what's happening there.
Well, again, it's with those kind of players, it's always going to be organic, and everybody's going to find their place. I mean, the relationship was anchored around Benoit and Fred, so they spoke about the thing, and so Benoit brings his atmosphere to the music, and Fred brings his, and I'd known Jerry Hemingway's stuff anyway since a long time, so I just had to figure out my way to sort of fit with him. And the hookups were kind of diagonal, like either I hook up with way Mark's playing or Jean-Jacques, it was the roles was kind of circulating. I was using some electronics in there as well, so that was maybe new for Fred, perhaps. But Jerry had already done stuff like that, so that's not new for him. But so we're very complementary. As it's a double trio, it's not like we're playing twice as much.
Sure. The
point was that each of us has to play like half as much, so that we create a whole group. So that's being reductionist is always more difficult than layering more stuff on top. I kind of like that aspect, trying to be minimal.
No, I'm asking because I love this concept of double drums always, and when drummers are really almost taking things back, like you said, like Mike Serin and Tom Rainey are playing on one Tony Malaby record. And it sounds amazing, it's not overplaying, it's one drums basically, but it's just the sounds. You're like, man.
I mean, the double drum thing, I like that. I've been doing quite a lot recently with Emile Bienda, who plays drums with Benoit as well.
Benoit,
he's from Brazzaville, so I feel pretty close to sort of African drumming and stuff, and so we have it's a very easy way to play together, and it's true. I like that two drums that makes one, and there's some for me, if I think about electronic music, the drum and bass thing, that was already layers of drums built up, so I look at it a little bit in that sense, just building kind of more complex layers. And the idea of, with two drums, it's almost like having drums and percussion, which is a classic, setup. But, it's just two drums. It works out good. Also, I do some other stuff with this guy, Nicolas Villebrun, who's actually a guitar player, but does really good drum programming and with his 808. And so it's like drums with sort of a drum machine, and that works out pretty good too, So I like the texture of, a more
rhythmical
dense
complexity.
Yeah. I tried to make it not too complex, but sonically it's
layering,
rich.
kind of. Yeah.
It's rich. That's what I'm after, is the richness.
Yeah. You mentioned electronics a lot, and when was the first time you started messing around with electronics? I mean, when they already came out in the 80s or like late 80s, or when did that happen?
Yeah, I always, I kind of like new equipment and, the new stuff that's happening. So I remember I bought a drum machine, a drum tracks, sequential circuits drum tracks. That was like in the mid 80s, as soon as that came out. So I bought one of those things. And I used that on, there's one track on Human Chain album, which we used that, and we linked it up to MIDI. It was interesting. Let's link up the drum machine with Django's keyboard and see what happens. So it was kind of some crazy stuff. And back in those days, the drum machine was trying to impersonate the drummer. That's how the Lindrum thing was working out and stuff like that. And I used actually the drum machine also with loose tubes a little bit. Now it's become a classic, drum machine. I sold it years ago, but now it's become a classic thing. Prince used it a lot, Madonna, and blah blah blah.
Yeah,
the same machine. So that was my first experience with electronics. Then my brother had a digital delay pedal.
I have that one, Steve.
Okay, right.
I bought that one from him. It's the same from Julian.
Julian's one. And he, Bill Frisell also had one of those as well.
That's why I bought it.
Yeah. And so Julian started messing around with the saxophone in that. And so I borrowed it, put a microphone into there for the drums, and started making some drum loops. So that's how that started. And then I bought a rack version of that pedal, and I've got several of those. So I was using that for years. That was my kind of setup, using 2 or 3 digital delay pedals linked together, and then a looping device, and then a Sherman filter bank, blah blah blah. So that again, it came from Julian, and that one particular delay pedal, and then you move on from there. So that's where all the electronic stuff comes from. And again, that's like when I'm using the electronics, it's like, okay, I've got the electronic side, which is not really listening to me, so I have to listen to it. So I have to play with the machine, and that makes these kind of rich atmospheres that I like. And again, I kind of play minimal because the machines are doing half, and I do the other half. So sometimes I'm playing kind of with one hand and stuff like that, while I'm twiddling the knobs and stuff, Yeah. So that's how that started out.
Just to use that in a creative context, did you learn? I mean, obviously you learned, but that it's still making music like in an improvised context. Did it take you a long time to figure these things out, or?
No, not especially. Of course, there's I'm always improvising with that those effects. I don't use samples, so everything I play is created in the moment with those pedals, inspired. But I love all those sort of extended impros that Bill Frisell was doing. And so I'm coming from that. Now the thing is with the pedals and being a drummer, and I like rhythmic music, so the axe is really on rhythmic stuff. It's not so much on textural and abstract forms. So it's pretty much rhythmic, which has its own complications with those machines to keep it rhythmic. So that's how I was using it. And then the other thing, which not everybody's aware of, but you get a lot of pollution into the microphone from the people you're playing with.
Sure.
Well, from the drums itself, but also from the other people you're playing with, and that gets into the machine as well. So that can be a plus or a minus. It depends what kind of material you're getting and who you're playing with too. So that was one of the really nice things with Benoit. He manages to deal with that pollution, his own pollution in my effects.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily disturb him too much sometimes. Well, sometimes it's an obstacle for him, and sometimes it's actually a help to him. So it's related to the material I put into the machine, but also the pollution.
Yeah.
And how everybody deals with that, you know, because I can't just deal with it on my own in my corner. You know, the music is collective, so everybody has to deal with my little machines too. You know, so. Which is not for everybody's taste, but that's how that works, you know. So you know, you come up with some, you know, interesting and you know, novel, you know, new things, you know, solutions. It's good.
Yeah, you were definitely one of the first guys, actually, right? I mean, as to my knowledge, that you started fiddling around with this, with the electronics almost.
Well, you know, let's say on the jazz scene that, you know, in my particular or our sphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of the early ones, especially to use it rhythmically, because like I say, you know, Tony Oxley, they already use electronics, but that's in a more, you know, abstract
way,
form. Yeah. But I suppose to use it more overtly rhythmic. Even today, there's not too many people that use it in a kind of improvisational way, because a lot of people are playing along with samples or pre-prepared stuff. Which is not what I'm interested in too much personally. So yeah, in the improvised form, you know, I was an early adopter.
Yeah. That's why I created. I mean, your own sound. You know, you have quite a specific sound. I mean, as a drummer, electronic guy, I mean, you know, when you're the drums with all your stuff, I kind of immediately like, oh shit, that's you. You know, it's like very recognizable.
Well, yeah, I mean, also I'm using, actually, when it comes down to it, I'm only using a very limited number of features. Basically, I'm just using a delay.
Yeah.
And a delay that becomes a loop. That's it. That's, you know, that's all I'm using. You know, there's a little bit of filtering and stuff, but there's nothing much more than that. So it's just a question of, you know, me juggling that. And as I keep it sort of fairly minimal, maybe you know, I go a little further into its, you know, into all the corners of its application, you know. So, and yeah, it gives me a certain kind of sound, maybe because I'm always using the same stuff, you know. So, but you know, from experimenting with the electronics, I think when Dhafer Youssef came to me and said, "Oh, can you help with my record?" That was also because, you know, doing my electronic music, I started the label, and you know, all of that fed into it. You know, the experience of orchestrating the music, you know, and then orchestrating the production. You know, and you know, and it goes on and on. But the root of it is that, and I think also for Omar as well, he was interested in sort of some, not necessarily new sonic possibilities, but you know, a jazz musician in his sphere that was open to, you know, some new tendencies and stuff like that. You know, so
do the machines sometimes still surprise you? I mean, like for me, it's like when I use a delay, you know, I try to sometimes loop something, and then I'm like, oh shit, now it's like a 17 something riff, and I'm like, okay, let's deal with it.
The machines do surprise me. Oh, that was, you know, and sometimes, like, you know, sometimes, oh, I don't like that very much, but you got to keep going, see if you can make it into something. Or sometimes, wow, that's nice, that's cool, you know. So there's definitely the surprise element, you know, and there's a kind of slight panic, you know, whether the machine's going to work, and you know, why is this not working, what have I not plugged in, you know. So it's part of the thing.
Do you still explore the electronics? I mean, like, do you still search for new delays always, or not?
Not new delays, no, because, you know, pretty much a delay is a delay.
Okay.
You know, afterwards it might have a this sound quality or that sound quality. Now I'm actually using, software. So, I used to travel a lot with this hardware, which was getting heavy traveling on the train. And so the stuff is, I'm using this software called Usine, which is really cool. It's made by a French double bass player, a friend of mine, Olivier Sans. And he made this really good software, which is a little bit like Max MSP, but it's made by he's a musician, so it's made by a musician to be used by a musician. So it's a little easier. And plus, in the early days when I was struggling with it, I could call him up and he'd help me with the software. So basically, we modeled the stuff I was using already, which wasn't so easy to create the same kind of digital delay. You'll know that when you put it onto hold, the freeze, and you change the delay time, you get this nice sweep, do 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 do. Which in the digital world is more difficult to do. But in the computer programming, there are other aspects that you can add on, different features and stuff. So I advance. I'm not always looking for new things, particularly just ways to improve. Or sometimes I've got a new idea. I heard a thing. It's not so recent, but Bon Iver. Bon Iver.
I love Bon Iver, man.
There's one track where they've got like saxophone going into some kind of delay thing, and I love that sound. And I think it's called. Well, they use a name, Messina. I don't know, is that the producer that was working with him? And he made up this sampling device. So I kind of made my version of that. So that's my latest thing, which is basically, it's relatively simple. It's kind of a looping device that's then polyphonic. So that gets some kind of interesting sounds. So, occasionally I add a new thing, but it's always based on the same thing, kind of loops and delays. And with the computer software, that opens up some avenues. And the other interesting thing with the computer is that sometimes I've done theatre music. And if you're performing live in the theatre, you have to have a certain kind of precision between different scenes and in the play. So you need to be able to have a kind of I need to be able to get to the delay time, have certain setups with the computer that enables you to have a kind of set, to make specific setups in a time frame, which is useful. Which with the hardware was just too wild. Couldn't control that.
Too unpredictable. I wanted to also ask you about your process of, we mentioned when you think very, very much in textures also and layering. And I listened today to some of your music, like the early 90s stuff. And how did you decide to become a band leader? How did that happen? Like those 1919 album and 1994, how did those?
Well, even when I was young, I played in a pub, and it was like, I just booked some gigs, and then, I call up some different players and say, do you want to play? Everybody, if you ask somebody, there's a gig, I'm going to pay you, do you want to play? They generally say yes. So it started like that, it could be we're just playing standards. And, depending who you pick to play with, you can have a sort of somebody that sort of co-leads the thing with you, but you book the gig, so it's under your name. And then I'm composing too, so if sometimes I bring some of my tunes to other people and we play them, but of course if you've got your own band, then you can tell them to play your own music. So it happens like that. I've got an idea, a concept of what I would like to try out, and then so you become, naturally you become the band leader.
So were you immediately comfortable in that role, being a band leader, or?
Relatively. I'm okay with telling people what to do. You know, that's okay. Often, you know, I need somebody that can also, you know, that can help me a little bit, that support, you know, that trusts me a little bit, you know. So for instance, if I give some of my music to Django Bates, and you know, okay, I write the chords down. Sometimes I write the chord symbols, sometimes I make some mistakes. Otherwise, I start just writing the piano voicings that I have. And then he does his thing, and he takes it to the nth degree. So, you know, if I've got somebody who, let's say actually is like me, you know, if you give me some music to play, I'm going to invent the rhythm part. You know, I'm not just going to play what's on the page.
Sure.
You know, I'm going to try to make your music sound good, and I'm going to do my thing in there. And so that's the same with other good players. You know, if I give them the top line, the melody, and they're going to, you know, harmonize it in a certain way that makes it sound great. You know, so if I gave one of my tunes to John Taylor, and then he starts playing that, and it's like, wow, did I write that? You know, so, you know, I've always played with people that can help me to a certain degree, you know. So same with Benoit, you know, with my quintet, you know, my brother's there, of course, he's supportive. And then there's Stuart Hall, a great guitar player and violinist that would, you know, correct some of my errors in the harmony and stuff like that, you know. So you have to surround yourself with good people. But the objective usually for me is to make a sound, you know, like a group sound. I'm not so much interested in just individual ways of playing, you know, and how individuals play. I'm more interested in the group sound, you know, which feeds into my electronic music and the way I want to play the drums. It's all about the sound. So if I have a good sound, I don't have to do much. It's just going to be good because you got a good sound. So that's pretty much my objective.
Yeah, it's nicely put. Yeah. Well, what brings the future for you as a band leader? I mean, or even I'll put it like that. What's the upcoming months for you? Like, you know, as a musician or a producer, or what?
Well, I've got a few things on the go. The double drum thing that's going to be a future thing. So I'm with some kind of Baroque singing.
Oh wow! Okay.
So kind of a little bit kind of a shaman, voodoo kind of thing. You know, we'll see what comes up. But it's kind of, you know, drums and voice, which is, you know, pretty primal. Let's face it, drums and voice is pretty primal. So, you know, I would say it's in that sort of sphere a little bit. Been doing some solo drum stuff with electronics, and actually with Benoit we've been doing some very rhythmic prepared piano for hand. So we both play the piano. So Benoit's playing the piano and I'm playing the piano too. So that's, you know, a new avenue. And so we got all kinds of stuff cooking.
Oh, fantastic. Well, looking forward to this. I mean, yeah, I love what he does always. So cool. Great, Steve. I'll let you be.
Okay. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time, man.
Speak to you soon. All right. Yeah, see you soon. I'll send you some links of the new music.
Yeah, please do.
Okay. All right. Ciao. Bye.